a boy who never grows up, a magical land of adventure, and children who vanish in the night. Peter doesn't just find the lost boys, he brings them to Neverland after they've fallen out of their prams, which sounds innocent until you realize that none of them ever return. He is almost literally a shadow that slips through nursery windows, luring children from their beds into a world that promises eternal adventure. But what if Neverland's magic hides a darker truth? J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan and Wendy, first published in 1911, it's a tale of youth, freedom, and the thrill of defying time that we've all cherished for generations. But blow off the fairy dust, and you might see something sinister glinting in Peter's eyes. Is he the carefree spirit of childhood wonder, or something far more dangerous? A kidnapper, a demon preying on the innocence of children. The world of Neverland, a fever dream of endless summers where mermaids sing and pirates clash under starlit skies. But beneath its charm lies a chilling question. Why do children never return? Remember that Peter Pan led Wendy Darling and her brothers into this wild, untamed land with intriguing promises. But what if his promises of adventure are a trap? What if the lost boys aren't just orphans, but victims, stolen from their homes? And then there's Captain Hook, whom we've been convinced to look upon as grim, vengeful, and menacing. But what if Hook isn't the villain? What if he's a desperate hero, a demon hunter chasing a malevolent force disguised as a boy? What if his obsession with Peter is not revenge, but salvation, and maybe even justice? Did you know that Captain Hook didn't exist in the earliest version because J.M. Barrie originally wrote Peter Pan as the villain? In J.M. Barrie's Peter and Wendy, Peter's visits weren't just the stuff of innocent dreams. They were calculated. Some might even call them predatory. He wasn't simply a playful spirit. He was a boy with a crooked smile who slipped into homes that weren't his. He broke in like a thief, not for jewels or coin, but for children. And once they followed him to Neverland, they were never quite the same. While London slept, cloaked in fog, Wendy, John, and Michael lay in their beds. The nursery window creaked open. A shadow danced inside, light and silent. Peter Pan stood over them. This wasn't his first time. He didn't knock. He didn't ask. He whispered promises of adventure and freedom. A place with no rules. He said exactly what they longed to hear, like a kidnapper offering sweets. And he delivered at first the ability to fly, the thrill of rebellion. But every promise was a means to an end. He needed them, not as friends, but as players in his game. Peter's method was always the same. Night after night, he prowled the edges of imagination, targeting the vulnerable. He didn't force them. He enticed them. Tales of pirates, mermaids, magic, his voice, a siren's call. And the lost boys, they weren't strays. They were trophies, handpicked. In Peter and Wendy, Barrie even writes that when they start to grow up, Peter thins them out. More on that later. That's how they stay young in Neverland, because Peter won't let them become anything else. There is no way back, not unless Peter allows it. Peter Pan actually puts bars on the children's windows, not to keep anything out, but to keep them from going home. He watches their parents search and grieve. Only when he's seen the full heartbreak does he take the bars off. Neverland was not a paradise. It was a cage made of fairy dust and denial. Barrie tells us the boys on the island vary, of course, in numbers, according as they get killed and so on. And Peter, he forgets them, as if forgetting makes it easier to replace. When a lost boy falls, Peter doesn't mourn. He simply finds another. He laughs into battle with pirates. He plays at danger. He pretends to be brave. But what if his freedom, his wildness, is just a mask for something stranger? He doesn't age. He doesn't regret. He doesn't feel. And that makes him something else entirely. And then there's the biggest question. What is Peter Pan, really? In Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens, an earlier story about him as a baby, he's described as a betwixt and between, not quite bird, not quite boy, and raised by fairies in Kensington Gardens. Barrie makes clear he's not fully human. He can talk to birds, doesn't understand time, and has magical traits beyond flight. His pointy ears, though never directly described in text, became a visual shorthand in later adaptations to emphasize his fey or elfin nature, much like elves, pixies, or trickster spirits. In J.M. Barrie's original notes that were found, the ones they don't include in stage plays or Disney adaptations, Peter Pan isn't a charming rogue. He's a demon boy. That's the word the author used. Demon. Something that feeds on the innocence of childhood and never lets go. A creature that collects souls. He appears as a young boy because that's the most trustworthy form, the most harmless, the easiest way to get children to follow. Peter even says to die would be an awfully big adventure. Could this be because Peter can't die? From the moment we meet him in Peter and Wendy, Peter's shadow is wrong. It writhes. It flees. It does not obey. When Wendy tries to sew it back on, it's not a charming moment. It's a violation of something primal. A shadow is supposed to be part of you. But Peter's wants to escape. That's not mischief. That's a warning. Shadows are bound to the soul. If Peter's wouldn't stay, what does that tell us about his? Barrie never explains why Peter's shadow behaves the way it does. But he shows us. It's erratic, desperate, almost sentient. That isn't childhood magic. It's something more ancient, something cursed. What if Peter didn't lose his shadow, but cast it off? It would explain the eerie disconnect in his presence, why he never remembers the boys he's lost, why he laughs at death, why he never feels grief. The night Peter enters the Darling nursery, he doesn't knock. He doesn't even speak at first. His presence fills the room like a fog. And when he does speak, Wendy and her brothers don't scream. They don't run. They listen. They follow. But why? Not many children, not even the most rebellious, would willingly climb out a window to fly away with a stranger in the dead of night, unless something deeper was at work. It wasn't persuasion. It was enchantment. Peter's voice, always described as melodic, light, irresistible, might have been more than charming. It might have been a spell. One cast not with wands, but with words. One designed to unmoor children from reason, from safety, from home. Neverland, he said, was paradise. But the longer you look, the more that promise crumbles. The lost boys never grow up, but they also never leave. Peter rules them, not as a friend, but as a collector. He doesn't mourn the ones who fall. He replaces them. They're not companions. They're inventory. And Neverland? It's not just an island. It feeds on those who enter it. The fairies serve Peter with disturbing loyalty. The mermaids sing songs that drown sailors. Time doesn't pass normally. Reality bends to his will, or perhaps to the will of something inside him. And always, that shadow, too alive, too rebellious, too wrong, creeps behind him. a reminder of what he once was, or what he bargained away. Barrie writes that Peter forgot his parents. But what if he didn't forget? What if he was erased? What if the price of eternal youth wasn't time, but humanity? What if Neverland's magic was the result of a pact? Peter's laughter echoes through the trees, but it's hollow. A sound with no warmth, no soul, just noise. The laughter of someone who's never truly felt joy, only the echo of it. He never grew up, not because he couldn't, but because he wasn't allowed to. Not a gift, a curse. And Neverland? It wasn't a sanctuary. It was a trap disguised as a dream. A gilded prison for children led there by the one who escaped death by making sure others couldn't. Even his name, Pan, is no accident. In mythology, Pan was the wild god of the forest, half man, half goat, luring travelers into madness with his pipe. He was freedom, but also fear. The word panic comes from him. J.M. Barrie chose that name for a reason. Peter wasn't just a boy. He was a force, untamed, unpredictable, and perhaps unknowable. He didn't just take children. He took their futures, their spark, their names. Every predator has a pattern, a rhythm to their darkness. Peter's was no different. He hunted innocence, craved the wild spark of youth. Neverland was his domain, a place where time stood still, and so did growth. But it wasn't paradise. It was a trap. And if you doubt that, look at the lost boys, his chosen ones. They were welcomed until they weren't, because they could only stay as long as they stayed young. The moment they began to grow up, the moment their voices deepened, their wonder faded, they were discarded, erased from a world that never asked where they'd gone. Barrie was clear when he wrote, "When they seem to be growing up, which is against the rules, Peter thins them out. Thins them out, a phrase that lands like a blade." What did it mean? Were they exiled? Forgotten? Or something darker? He made it seem like everything they ever wanted was in Neverland. He didn't force them, not physically, but he manipulated them with stories, promises, dreams, and they followed. That was his pattern. Lure, isolate, replace. He made sure they had no one left but him. And when they no longer fit into his vision, they were removed. His obsession with staying young mirrored something twisted, like a collector trying to preserve a perfect moment. Trophies in a fantasy that would never end. The lost boys even forget where they came from in Neverland. Their spirits weren't broken overnight. They were reshaped, molded to fit the story he needed them to tell. And when they didn't, they vanished. In J.M. Barrie's Peter and Wendy, Hook is cast as the villain. But what if he's actually tracking something far more monstrous? Let's look at the book evidence. Peter Pan is never portrayed as a normal boy. Barrie describes him as cocky, forgetful, incapable of true memory or empathy, amnesic, impulsive, and callous. It's Peter, not Hook, who initiates violence. During the climactic duel on the Jolly Roger, Peter cuts off Hook's hand and tosses it to the crocodile, turning the creature into Hook's predator. That's not heroism. It's calculated and cruel. Why is this shocking? What kind of child has the courage and the stomach to sever a man's hand and feed it to a crocodile? Yet Barrie shows us Hook in a very different light. Barrie calls him refined, an Eton and Oxford man who values culture and intellect. This sophistication doesn't fit the grotesque caricature. He's certainly not mindless or merely vengeful. In some tellings, the lost boys who follow Peter, they don't stay children. They might actually grow up after running away. And when they do, they become pirates. Think about it. Where do all the grown-ups in Neverland come from if no one ages? Why does Peter need to keep recruiting more boys? Captain Hook, the villain of the story, might not be Peter's enemy at all. He might be his first lost boy. Hook's fight isn't for revenge, it's for justice. He sees the children disappearing, stolen by a facade of innocence. Hook's dread of the crocodile's ticking clock is symbolic. It's not fear, it's judgment, the reckoning a grown man must threaten an eternal child. Peter repeatedly uses violence, cruelty, manipulation. His world is a game, but one played at the cost of real flesh and spirits. Everything and everyone answered to Peter Pan in Neverland, but Hook didn't. Hook was the true rebel. He didn't cower. He'd seen how children vanished from London, how they were lured by Peter's promises, never to return. Hook was an adult in a world that despised them. He was everything Neverland was against, growth and free thinking. And he was the only one who dared to act. His adulthood came with knowledge, and he had used that knowledge to track Peter's shadow across the island. He knew the lost boys weren't free. He knew they were prisoners, bound to a creature who fed on their youth. Hook's mission was clear: stop Peter Pan, save the children, and end the nightmare. But Peter struck first, and struck hard. Think about it. Hook must have been rallying the lost boys, urging them to flee. He must have been trying to return them to their families. Why else would Peter be so mad? Peter wouldn't allow his converts to be swayed. He was like a religious fanatic. In the last battle on the Jolly Roger, some might say Hook didn't fight fair. But how could he? He saw a world rigged against him, and he was committed to saving the children by whatever means necessary. And that was what he did. During a moment of real danger, Peter snaps at Wendy for taking things seriously, shouting, "How dare you spoil the game?" showing just how far he's detached from reality. He isn't just playing games. He's building an army of children to fight his personal war. Hook raised his sword to protect. When Hook lost his right hand, he changed, and you can't blame him for that. But that didn't make him falter. He may have lost a hand, but he wouldn't let it stop him. So he replaced his hand with a hook and kept his mind sharp despite the pain. This wasn't the mark of a villain. Maybe the warning was always there. Neverland isn't a dreamland. It's a place you never grow up because you never leave. Peter Pan may fly, but his shadow leaves behind anything but freedom. Or maybe it's just a children's story. I'll leave that for you to decide. Let me know. Do you think Peter is a demon or the hero? Do you think Hook is the villain or trying to save the lost boys? This is part 2. If you missed the first video, wait until you see how it all started. Check out my first Peter Pan video next. Thanks for watching.